Hi everyone, we've just put together this video to show you how to complete the Global Opportunities Risk Assessment form. So everyone who is doing a physical placement outside the UK has to complete one of these forms, whether that's study, work or volunteering or anything else that involves travelling overseas under Global Opportunities. We just need you to complete this form to show that you've considered all the potential risk factors involved and that you've, thoroughly made sure that it's a safe placement to do, and for any risks that are involved, you've considered how to mitigate those risks. When you first look at the form, it can look like quite a lot to do. It can look a little overwhelming or confusing. So we've just put this video together to try and help walk you through how to fill it out. And once you get started, it is fairly straightforward. So first part, that's information that you'll definitely be able to do just fine. So name, student number, those kind of personal details, your email address, where you're going to be living when you're on your placement, name of your host organization, so your employer or the university you're at, next of kin contact, so that can be someone back home for you, so maybe a parent or a spouse, a close friend, whoever you'd want us to contact in an emergency, basically. And another next of kin there. So that doesn't have to be someone in your host country. That's someone who you would want to be contacted, or we would need to contact in, touch wood, wouldn't need it, but in the case of emergency. Whereas these ones below, the university single point of contact and other contacts, and destination emergency contacts, these will need to be people in the country where you're based. So your point of contact might be the exchange coordinator, or if you've got a personal tutor there, someone like that, or your employer or the placement provider, anyone like that who knows you, and again, who to contact in case anything's needed. So the more contacts you can give there, the better. But of course, you understand maybe you don't know anyone in the country outside of your employer or the university, so you may not have someone for every single box, but just anyone who is relevant, include in there. Okay, and then make sure that you've checked the emergency numbers for that country, so fire, ambulance, police. Remember, in some countries, they won't all be the same number. So whereas here it's 999 for all three, there may be different numbers for each service in your host country. So make sure you've checked that first, as well as checked where the British Embassy or the embassy for your nationality is in that country. Put in your insurance details, so you should have booked appropriate travel and health insurance, so you can pop the details in there just briefly as well. We will have also asked you to submit some sort of confirmation that you've booked insurance ahead of time too. We don't need all the details, just maybe the email of confirmation you get from the insurance company to show that you have done that. And then also a place to input the nearest hospital or medical centre, just to show that you've considered what you would do and where would you go should an emergency arise. Okay, so here is the sort of risk assessment table that we need to look at. And this is what we'll be considering throughout the rest of this form. And it's just a way of sort of breaking down each risk factor that you might come across and look at what to do sort of based on the context of that risk. So you'll see on the top there is likelihood of occurrence, and on the y-axis, the y-axis here, the left-hand axis, there is hazard severity. So this is where you'll think of this particular hazard. It will become clear a bit later. So say, for example, the hazard is a natural disaster. Say if you're, I don't know, in Japan, and then what you're thinking of is an earthquake, because that's a place where earthquakes can happen. You would consider the likelihood of the occurrence. So maybe in this case, it's a possibility, or unlikely. Don't know, you'd have to kind of consider that for yourself. And then you'd think, okay, in the case that this would happen, would this be potentially a minor hazard, a moderate hazard, serious, or major? So say if we decide that it's unlikely, but if it were to occur, then the hazard would be serious, then this would be yellow, so caution. So that means that it's something to definitely consider and be aware of, but put measures in place so that you know what to do in that situation. Of course, most things will hopefully be in these green categories where you just have to take care in general to avoid them. And then if anything started coming out in these red boxes here at stop, then we would definitely encourage you not to go ahead with the placement. If there's a genuine danger, then that would go in the red box and we would encourage you not to go. And it explains a bit more there what care, caution, alert, stop mean, just in a little traffic light system, just to help you evaluate what kind of risk each situation might pose. Okay, so here is the part that can look a little tricky to fill in, but once you get going, it's really not too difficult. So again, that's just where you can put your location and a brief description of the placement. For example, if you're doing a work placement and working in a lab, then you can put lab work, doing this, doing that, that kind of thing. And then you'll see on this left-hand column, there are different categories of hazard as we go down. So there's study, transport and travel, health risks and medical infrastructure, accommodation, location, individual factors, and communications infrastructure. Okay, so that is the end of it. So then there's just more at the bottom there for further details. So as we go through each of these hazards, we have those at risk, that will be you. This is an individual risk assessment just for you. So we're thinking about it from a perspective of what is a hazard to you personally. Then this column is how could they be harmed? So you. So how could you be potentially harmed in your study or work if that's what you're doing? So we've put some examples here, like risk of accidents causing injury or fatality, study of hazards that have potential to cause damage, lab work. You can add any more in if there are any more that are relevant to you. And then, so you first consider, okay, by itself, what is the uncontrolled risk level of that? If you just go into the situation without any particular risk controls in place, how would you rate that risk? So say you're doing risk of accidents causing injury or fatality. If you're doing, maybe if you're doing a sport out there, you might decide that's an alert. If you think, an injury is possible. And then required controls, you put, okay, how can you mitigate that risk? So, that could be, I don't know, if you're doing sport again, making sure you're exercising in a safe environment with, only people you trust, make sure that you've warmed up first, you're wearing the appropriate clothing, stuff like that. Just, mitigating risk sort of methods that you probably already do anyway, but this is where it's really important to consider them. So say if you put all those things for sport in there, warming up, wearing the correct clothing, using the correct equipment, that kind of thing, then you could bring this risk of originally caution or alert, hopefully bring it down a level. So the controlled risk level would just be at care. And obviously this is going to be different for each of you. You need to think about your sort of own circumstances and assess it based on that. So say in that example, we would delete care, maybe stop in there because we think it's just a caution or alert. And then after putting in our required controls, then that could go down to just a care. So there you have, and you can add in your controls here. That is how you'd complete that section. And it's basically just the same all the way down, considering the risk factors in each of these scenarios. So transport and travel, what do we have here? Risk of theft, that could be depending on where you are and how common, maybe crime is, if there's, pickpockets around, maybe that would first be on a caution, but you delete these. Oops. There we go. And then you can use in here, some of the things you put in, check and adhere to FCDO travel advice, use safe transport, keep your belongings in, an inside pocket of a bag or keep them close to you, things like that. So you can reduce this risk from a caution down to just care. You get the idea. So it kind of goes on just through different factors now. Just consider it for health and medical, accommodation, location, individual factors, communications infrastructure. And just add in and take away things as you see them applicable to you. It's really for you to consider it for your own individual circumstances. Different people will have really different, things to consider based on personal circumstances, the kind of work you're doing, the country where you are, whether you're in maybe a city or more rural, loads of things like that, just to give you an overall picture of what could potentially be a hazard and considering what you can do to reduce that hazard as best you can, so you can stay as, safe and well as you can during the placement. So that's just a quick overview on how to do the form. I hope that makes sense, but if you want any help with completing it or any of the other forms, just feel free to reach out to us. We can book a Teams meeting to go through it together. Anything you need, really.